Hello, this is John Miares from the USDA NASS Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. In this presentation, we are going to cover topics from Section E and Section E1 regarding pest management practices, as well as the conclusion page. As a general note, many of the topics covered in this presentation are comparable to what was already covered in presentations for the ARMS Phase 2 survey on these sections. If you have already reviewed that material as part of your self-study for ARMS 2, then you will probably not get that much more information out of this presentation. Section E focuses on questions tied to integrated pest management, or IPM. Data from this section allows researchers to determine the extent to which growers have adopted practices that either provide an alternative to pesticide use, reduce the number of pesticides applied, reduce the toxicity of the pesticides used, or improve the effectiveness of the chemicals used. Knowing this information helps to determine the corresponding environmental, public health, and cost benefits derived from decreased pesticide use. Questions asked in Section E are intended to focus on pest management practices used on any of the total vegetable acres on the operation, not just the target crops for the survey. You may need to remind the respondent that when discussing pesticides and pests, that we want to include chemicals applied to treat weeds, insects, and diseases. A common misconception is that a pesticide is only used for insect pests. Many of the questions asked in this section have been asked for several years on the fall chemical surveys, but one change that has occurred since the last time VCUS was conducted is that for the yes-no questions, enumerators should be entering a 1 for yes and a 3 for no. In past years, only ones were coded when the answer was yes, and no's were left blank, or the enumerator would enter a dash in the cell. For 2020, 1 for yes and 3 for no. Please pay attention to the skip instructions in this section. The first one comes at the top of page 13, where you are asked if pesticide applications were reported in Section B. The second potential skip comes with question 4, where the operator is asked about scouting for pests. If scouting activities were deliberate, then enter a 1 in question 4 and continue on with questions 5 and 6. If scouting activities were more happenstance, occurring when performing other tasks in the field, you should enter a code 2 in question 4 and skip question 5 and 6 before continuing on with question 7. If the field was not scouted at all, you should enter a 3 for question 4 and skip to question 10. The remaining yes-no questions in Section E should be fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. However, it is possible that the respondent doesn't feel comfortable answering information about those pest management practices. If questions 1 through 26 in Section E are refused, then the office use box marked with item code 500 that appears after question 26 should be coded with a 1. You should also write notes on the paper form indicating that the entire section was refused. If the respondent answered some or most of the questions in the section, then this box with the 500 should be left blank. Additionally, notes should be made on paper forms as to which questions may have been refused by the operator, so if there is any question, that will minimize any confusion. Section E1 contains several new questions which were added to the Vegetable Chemical Use Survey at the request of USDA's Office of Pest Management Policy, or OPMP. The OPMP is the agency tasked with understanding grower pest management practices and using that understanding to help support the availability of pest management tools for growers. These questions were first introduced on the 2019 Fruit Chemical Use Survey and the 2019 Wheat Production Practices Report for ARMS 2. Comparable questions have been added to the Soybean Production Practices Report for ARMS 2, and the intention is that these questions will now be standard on all fruit and vegetable chemical use surveys going forward, as well as production practices reports for ARMS Phase 2. Many of the questions in this section were designed to determine grower engagement in the use of best management practices, including questions about reducing spray drift, performing maintenance on sprayers, using hedgerows and windbreakers, and communicating with neighbors and others about reducing spray drift. If the respondent is hesitant to complete these questions, please emphasize that it is okay if the operator isn't implementing one of these practices. The respondent should not feel pressured to provide an answer when a practice isn't being implemented. Additionally, if the respondent refuses to answer any or all of these questions, please take good notes as to which questions were refused. Unlike with Section D, there is no completion code box to indicate that the operator refused the entire section, but many of the questions allow you to enter a code 99 to represent "don't know." Right before the first question in Section E1, you are asked to specify what the primary target vegetable crop is on the operation. Unlike Section E, where you were to consider all target and non-target vegetable crops, Section E1 wants to focus on the operator's pest management practices as they apply to a single particular vegetable crop, with the understanding that certain vegetable crops may have more needs than others when it comes to pest management. One potential obstacle in working with respondents trying to complete this section is if the operation hires custom sprayers to apply pesticides to the vegetable crops. The operator then may not have the answers to these questions. Included in every kit envelope is a consent form that is to be used to get permission from the operator to contact the custom sprayer to collect this information. For 2020, this form was modified to allow for the operator to provide this consent verbally rather than requiring the consent be provided in writing. As part of the resources available to help you understand these new questions, representatives of the Office of Pest Management Policy prepared a presentation which discusses many of these new questions in detail. The RFO team recommends that if you have not watched that video as part of your training for ARMS 2, that you should be sure to watch it as you prepare for the Vegetable Chemical Use Survey. There is a lot of detailed information in the interviewer's manual about these new questions as well. We found that many operators last year completing these questions were able to answer them without any difficulty, but occasionally there were some explanations as to why the operator was using a particular practice that were needed to help clarify the answers reported. Be sure to take plenty of notes if the operator has any comments about these questions, and be sure to use code 99 for "don't know" where applicable on any unknown answers to these questions. The table in question 1 focuses on strategies used by producers to help reduce spray drift. Examples of things they are asking about include altering spraying times depending upon weather conditions, using drift-reducing adjuvants, using drift-reducing nozzles, calibrating the sprayers either before or during the season, altering sprayer settings to manually improve precision, using shielded sprayers, and other technologies. In column 1, you want to indicate whether the activity indicated was used at all. If the answer is yes, then you should complete columns 2 and 3, which ask if it was specifically used to keep pesticide applications on target, and in column 3, how easy or how difficult it was to implement this practice. If the answer in column 1 is no, you should skip columns 2 and 3 and continue on to column 4, where you would indicate why this practice wasn't used. If there is more than one reason why the practice was not used, enter all appropriate codes on the line in numeric order. If there is some other reason the practice was not used that is not listed as an option in column 4, for example, the practice was not necessary, then enter that specific reason in words on the line which says specify. Questions 2 and 3 include pick lists that ask about the types of spray activities that were used and what activities might have facilitated the need to recalibrate sprayers. If there are other reasons why a recalibration might have been necessary, or other types of spray activities which took place that are not included in the pick list, be sure to specify what was happening on the lines provided. Questions 4 and 5 in section E1 are very similar, except for the fact that question 4 deals with pre-emergent pesticide applications, while question 5 deals with post-emergent pesticide applications. The two separate columns are necessary to distinguish information for air blast sprayers versus ground boom tank systems. Be sure to review respondent answers to question 3 to determine the methods of spraying used in order to determine which questions should be asked. It is possible that only one column or the other needs to be completed. You also may need to check multiple pesticide types in questions 4A and 5A. For all other parts of the questions, only one checkbox should be selected for each question based on what was typical for the primary target on that operation. For parts B and C, you will notice that the options are not necessarily the same for air blast sprayers and ground boom sprayers. So please make sure you are selecting the correct options and not just copying the same answers over or think you're copying the same answers over from one column to the next. For all other parts of the questions, the pick lists are consistent between the two columns. As a reminder, it is okay to report code 99 for don't know when that option is necessary. Question 6 focuses on spray equipment maintenance. Be mindful that if the operator reports in question 6A that the operation never cleaned the systems in 2020, then question 6B can be skipped. In question 6D, you are asked what the most common reasons for replacing the nozzles on the sprayers were in 2020. For this question, you should be sure to check all boxes that apply. For all other parts of this question, there should only be one choice selected. If in question 6A or 6D, the respondent reports some other time when the systems were cleaned or some other reason why spray nozzles had to be replaced, be sure to specify that reason in the blank space provided. Question 7 focuses on hedgerows and other windbreaking structures used by the operation to help manage potential spray drift. Hedgerows are classified as dense woody vegetation planted in a linear design to achieve a natural resource conservation purpose. Please only pick one of the 6 options, which could possibly be don't know. Question 8 asks about how often certain practices were used to manage pesticide resistance in fields. It is set up as a table, with the question or practice being asked about in the leftmost column, followed by 3 columns where you can record answers if we're talking about herbicides, insecticides, or fungicides. Please pay attention to the types of chemicals applied in section D to make sure you only answer questions specific to the types of chemicals applied to those fields. For example, if the operator did not apply any fungicides to the vegetable fields, then the questions associated with fungicides should be left blank. Also, don't just put any answers into any of the boxes that are grayed out. Some of the questions, like Part D, which looks at planting disease-resistant cultivars and rootstocks, is only relevant to the fungicide column. Questions 9 and 10 ask how often certain sources of information are used to inform pest management decisions made by the operator for both general sources and from university or cooperative extension services. Most of the responses are going to be ranges with respect to percentages. Always, most of the time, sometimes, or never. Please record the operator's best selection on this. Only one choice may be selected. You can't say 2 or 3 in those columns. Also, if the respondent says in question 9b that they never use university or cooperative extension services, then question 10 can be skipped. Question 11 addresses communications and consultations with different sources regarding reducing off-target impacts, or in other words, spray drift. Be sure to check all boxes in this question that apply and take good notes if clarification is necessary. If none of the boxes are applicable, you don't have to check a box, but you should leave a note on the page to verify that the answer should be none of the above. Question 12 asks about best management practices, or BMPs, that may have been used during the season. Part of the focus with this question is about checking to see whether operators are in compliance with the law regarding appropriate application of pesticides, but also that operators are working hard to avoid non-point source contamination of water resources by agricultural pesticides, as well as protect pollinators and their habitats. These best management practices are promoted by USDA, state departments of agriculture, and cooperative extension. If the practice was used at all, we want to answer the questions in both columns. However, if the answer to any one question in column 1 is never, then there is no need to answer the corresponding question in column 2. Finally, question 13 is looking at different auditing systems that growers may participate in. In some areas of the country, there is a very high participation rate in these programs listed, while in other parts of the country, farmers may have never heard of these particular groups. For example, Global GAP, Eurogap, and the SQF program are private sector bodies that set out voluntary standards for the certification of production processes for agricultural products. There are other auditing systems which may not be food safety specific, but are also of interest and can be recorded in the Other Please Specify option. Be sure to check any and all boxes that apply, and if the other category is specified, please write in a response in the blank space provided. We have finally reached the conclusion section of this form. Most of the questions here are more for enumerators to record answers for, rather than for enumerators to ask the respondent. For example, did the respondent use farm or ranch records to report pesticide data? You will probably know the answer already based on your interactions with the respondent. Were any supplements used when recording pesticide data? Only you will know that. Last but not least, don't forget to fill in the office use boxes on the bottom of the back page with the response code, respondent code, mode code, and enumerator number for all questionnaires, including refusals and inaccessible records. Once you're done, be sure to check over your work and make sure that all the information makes sense. It is also recommended that you go through the VegChem edit sheet to make sure that the data relationships recorded make sense. Once complete, transcribe the information into the CAPI system. Be sure to hold on to the completed paper forms until at least mid-March, as we will be reviewing the data that comes in from CAPI to make sure it makes sense, that codes weren't miskeyed, or application rates got lost in translation. Although all of the records are going to be submitted in CAPI, maintaining a backup copy of the paper form will be critical just in case. That's all we were going to go over here. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact your supervisor, your NASDA coordinator, or one of the statisticians at the regional field office. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all soon.